Welcome to the Toffee Blues, your source for all things Everton, and welcome to a show where Paul and I are going to be closing the door on the Farhad Moshiri era at Everton, which is really, I'm really pleased to be able to be saying this because for a long time I felt like this day wasn't going to come, that we could have this discussion. So, you know, it's been 8 years, I should say. It's 8 years of ups and probably more downs, but loads to get through. Let's just reel off some of the statistics to start out with. You know, 670 million spent on players. The most expensive one of them being Sigurdsson for about 40 odd million. Eight managers in that time. 12 if you include Duncan Unsworth's caretaker stints. Three directors of football. Most recently, of course, Kevin Telwell. And
Two
yeah,
top half finishers. Is that all we managed? Under Koeman and under Carlo.
I'd say so. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
pretty
seventh
accurate.
and tenth. I think every other season we finished bottom half, hasn't it?
Effectively, yeah.
What what a record! As you said, you got the last couple of years, especially. A lot of Evertonians, including myself, are thinking, "My God, I think we're tied to this fella forever." Like it's bad enough that we're owned by an absolute basket case who's just hell bent on making us worse and worse and more farcical and more farcical. But he might actually take us out of business. That's how inept he's been, or that's just how unwilling he is to keep funding the club to basically fix his own mess. So Farhad Moshiri, so much could be written about him. Not much of it good. I mean, he'll always have people who stick it up for him because of the stadium the Bramley Moor, which would not have happened without him, granted. But just when he first rolled into town, whenever it was, 2016, I think it was the spring of
It was, yeah.
2016, wasn't it? It was not long after Christmas. When he came in originally, I thought, right, this is it. What we've been waiting for years and years and years. Finally, Everton have got a financial backer. We can go into every summer now looking to buy the best players, spend a bit of money. We don't have to be frugal. We don't have to be getting loan players who you've never heard of, or players who are just coming up for a little 1 or 2 million fee who can't get a deal anywhere else, which should become the norm under the Moyes, hadn't it? And I just thought finally Everton are going to not become Manchester City or Chelsea, but Everton are finally going to be putting their best foot forward now as a football club. Something I don't feel like Everton had been doing for years under Bill Kenwright and latterly under in the Moyes era. The last couple of years under Moyes, it just kind of felt like we'd accepted our lot in life, or people at the club had. And I mean, if I thought what we were doing at the time wasn't particularly inspired and finishing, sixth, seventh, and eighth, and not really getting anywhere in the cups and not really winning any big away games, then oh my God, compare that to what we've been doing the last couple of seasons, where it's just been, you know, last day relegation battles and second to last day relegation battles, and having to read about how the club might run out of money this week and how the club might be sold to a Ponzi scheme in America, and how the owner, Machiri's dealing with him, is like trying to nail jelly to the wall, according to all the in the knows. It's been exhausting. That's the word. Farhad Moshiri's tenure at Everton has just been exhausting, and Evertonians are just absolutely shattered now and are just ready for some pleas for some stability and some peace and quiet.
Well, precisely that. Like, so his first game was like, it was it was a 2-0 win over Chelsea in the cup quarter final, and then he
Yeah,
was
I remember
wheeled
it
out.
well.
He was wheeled out by Ken Wright to say what a manager and all that other stuff. Which that was probably the first alarm bell, and then his last game was almost fittingly at his former club Arsenal because he came here after selling up at Arsenal, didn't he? And that was a dour 0-0 draw, which obviously not a bad result at Arsenal, I guess. But
Was he at that game the other week down at the Emirates? Or
I don't think I don't know actually. I'm not.
I,
I
I'm not sure when he actually last attended. He hasn't attended at Goodison for a couple of years now, but I'm trying to think when was the last time he actually turned up to watch Everton in the flesh anyway. I don't think it was the West Ham game, the one Frank's last game where he ran off into his car when Sky were following him saying it's not my decision whether the manager gets sacked or not. And then Ken Knight got his mug on the telly a couple of minutes after that. I think he's been spotted somewhere since then, hasn't he? Can't remember which game it was. It might have been the game after Bill Kenwright had passed away, because I remember seeing an image of Moshiri sat next to like a wreath of flowers, which has obviously been put down in the seat that was normally reserved for Bill Kenwright. So I can't remember when that was
That was
specifically. I know it was when
just
Kenwright
over a
passed away,
year
but
ago, weren't it?
yeah, I can't remember what game it was at. It was not at Goodison. It was another away game in London somewhere. So um, I'm just not sure when Moshiri's last been interested in Everton. I think he hasn't been interested in a good while, probably since Carlo went, or since he had to sack Benitez. I think after that, Moshiri just went, yeah, I'm not even interested in Everton now. He probably hasn't even looked for the score or anything, and he's only attended the odd game here and there when he's kind of been in the country, and he's like, oh, I might as well, something to do with me day. But in terms of being like a hands-on owner and overseeing everything, I don't think that's been the case for Moshiri for 2-3 years, and it reflects in the fact that he's been desperate to sell the club to anyone who'll have it in that time.
Yeah. So on that note, obviously the sale went through to the Freakin Group just over a week ago now. So that officially sort of brings to an end his tenure. But how did you feel when he first took over, like in 2016? You sort of mentioned there, like you felt like it was we had the financial back, and I think that's everyone was so focused on him having the money to spend. We never really
Del-
thought much into the other side of things, like how
del-
he could be a bit
yeah,
of a lunatic, basically.
delighted when he came in. Delighted. I mean, I didn't think we were suddenly going to be winning the FA Cup that season, and we were going to be winning the league within 2 or 3 seasons, which is what happened to Chelsea and latterly Manchester City. I thought kind of those days of football had gone at that point, but I thought there's going to be no more scrabbling around, getting like last minute loan deals for people you've never heard of on transfer deadline day. There'll be no more deadline days like when Strackwell AC and Drenfer just rock on through the door and we're like, who are these people? Is this the best we can get? I thought we were going to have more transfer deadline days or more transfer windows like the one we had in Martinez's first summer, where we were actually buying 3 or 4 players who were going to come in and make a difference straight away, and we kind of knew what they were, and you could be excited as an Evertonian thinking we've got a really good team that's building here, and we're not going to be the whipping boys anymore. We're not going to be going away to the likes of Anfield and Emirates and Stamford Bridge and just praying for a draw. We're going to be building a team that can go to these places and win, and these other clubs are going to have to sit up and take notice of us again. But Everton, essentially, I thought Everton were going to become heavyweights in English football as long as we just made a couple of the good key decisions early, which sadly we didn't do. Which was
Yeah,
one of those was moving out the old guards who were useless, and I'd offered nothing prior to Moshiri getting there, and offered nothing after Moshiri did arrive. Still, they offered nothing until they were forced out years later. And a couple of smart decisions when it came to actually making some signings, not doing what we did do, which was just throwing money around like it was going out of fashion. Actually, identify a couple of key areas in the squad that we need to improve, and then focus on them rather than just okay, that shiny player is available over there. His team wants 30 million for him. ER is 32 million for him, just so we can get him here a couple of days quicker. It just felt like we were a club that just hadn't had money in so long that we'd forgotten how to use money. Essentially, it's like when you're absolutely starving and you haven't eaten for days, and then you go on a mad bender and make yourself sick. Do you know what I mean? Or if you haven't had a drink for weeks and weeks, and then suddenly you just decide I'm going to go out and paint town red tonight, and then by your third drink you need carrying home. It was just a shame. So yeah, it's when he first arrived, I had all the optimism in the world, and I was excited. I thought we're finally going to get my generation of Evertonian is finally going to see what it's like to support a football club that is taken seriously by the rest of the other top teams in England. Because if you're under the age of, let's say, 40, you don't remember any of the late 80s or earlier, Everton have never really been a relevant club in terms of the title picture and winning trophies. We've just always been an also ran, haven't we? And I thought those days were over, but those days were over. Sadly, we want to go back to being that now. It got even worse. We went from being an also ran to a club that basically was hanging on by its fingertips year after year.
yeah. On that note, you mentioned like overzealous spending. What would you say were the best and worst signings that Machiri's reign brought us?
The best signings, well, the obvious one is the goalie, isn't it, Jordan Pickford? I think he's the only. Is he the only signing who we made during that initial splurge? It was the summer of 2017, wasn't it, when we bought Pickford and we bought like the likes of Klasan and Rooney and all that. I think he's the only player from that sort of era, and Michael Keane as well. He's another one, but he shouldn't be here. I think Pickford's the only player from that sort of transfer window who's still here, who is kind of justified his fee and then some. Everyone else who he bought has moved on for whatever reason. The Klasan didn't last 5 minutes, couldn't hack the league. Sigurdsson, had some moments here and there, but overall was a very disappointing signing considering the money we spent on him and the expectation that was there. Rooney was gone after a year. Never agreed with bringing Rooney back. I thought that was a poor decision at the time, but even so, I would have hoped we'd have got more out of him than what we did. And who else did we sign? Sandro Ramirez. I'm going through all these worst signings. I'll get to the good ones in a minute. Sandro Ramirez. Oh my goodness! I know we didn't spend a lot, but you'd be hard pushed to find a worse player I've ever seen with an Everton shirt. Just an absolute farmer whenever he got on the pitch for us. And I mentioned it before, Michael Keane, who's just, I don't want to be absolutely horrible because he's a player who always has given his best when he's still, but he's long since overstayed his welcome. Michael Keane was a player who should have been out of Everton Football Club 4 or 5 years ago, never mind still being here in 2024 and still getting played by the manager we currently have. So the good signings are few and far between. There's Pickford, there's Tarkowski, I suppose. Who else? I don't want to say this. Everyone knows my feelings about it. I suppose Ashley Young. Ashley Young has justified himself the last couple of months, hasn't he? I've never been a fan of Ashley Young, particularly on this channel, but even I have to give him his props when he deserves it. He's done well the last couple of months, and we'd have been a lot worse off without him. But yeah, the list of players who you're really happy we signed, it's not very long at all. And not all of that's Moshiri's fault. It's his fault for throwing the money around and listening to agents, but it wasn't his fault that we had a couple of crap directors of football who just scouted players who were not fit for their purpose, really.
On that note, though, does that sort of land at his door again because he hired the sporting directors?
Well, yeah, in a sense, it does, but some of those sporting directors, though, will turn around and say that a lot of the worst signings were nothing to do with them. Like, I'm sure Marcel Brands will have a list as long as his arm of signings who came in, who he pushed back against and says, I didn't pick them. I didn't want El Ghazi. I didn't want Nikola Vlasic. I didn't want not Vlasic, he was Walsh, wasn't he? I didn't want who was the other guy who he pushed back against? Alan. I didn't want James Rodriguez. These are all directors of football that had their own visions. And again, Steve Walsh tells anyone who will listen. I can't think who said it the other day, but it's cropped up again on the radio. Apparently, Steve Walsh scouted Erling Haaland when he was about 15 and tried to get us to sign him. Now, I don't know how much truth is in the story. He said it before, Steve Walsh, and someone was on TalkSport the other day saying it again. I can't remember who it was, but they were pushing the story that Everton could have had Erling Haaland, and we turned our nose up at him because we thought he was too small, weirdly. But yeah, Walsh, so he wanted the likes of Jack Wilshere and people like that. Now, I'm very glad we didn't get them, but you can blame directors of football for messing up, but directors of football have also got the right to kind of defend themselves and say, well, if you're going to bring me into the club, you need to trust my vision and let me go for the players I want to bring in and not go over my head. Because Moshiri 100% did undermine his directors of football. He's been doing it ever since he's arrived. It was him who was trying to get Saha farcically. It was him who was apparently trying to get Balotelli into the club, was trying to get Gareth Bale into the club at one point. And you're just thinking, if you're the director of football, you must be ripping your head out thinking, I'm trying to build something here long term and create a culture and sort of instill a mentality into the players where I only want players of this sort of makeup, where I want players who are high energy, or I want players who are can stick to like a structure. I don't kind of want mavericks, or I don't want this, or I don't want that. So yeah, I get what you're saying. He's the one who's picking these managers and directors of footballs, but he hasn't given them the tools to succeed a lot of the time. So sometimes some of it's the director of football's fault, some of it's his fault, and some of it just comes down to a couple of managers getting in the way and not justifying the faith, really.
On that note, who would you say is the best and the worst manager under Moshiri?
When you say the best, do you mean the best suited to us, or the way, or because in terms of the best, one of the best CV was Carlo Ancelotti, wasn't he? Koeman got the best finish in a first full season. He got us 7th with a not very good squad, from what I remember. I know it had Lukaku in it, but it still had the likes of Tom Cleverley and Croc James McCarthy and Ashley Williams. Something to be said for getting that team into Europe from Ronald Koeman. Ancelotti was probably the manager who all the fans loved the most and was able to get the most out of the least, because his squad he got the likes of Tom Davis into the top half. But I think probably the best managerial pick that Moshiri made, and sadly it just didn't pan out. It was maybe the right guy at the wrong time. It was probably Marco Silva. Look at that now, because look what Silva's done since leaving Everton. He's flying at Fulham, isn't he? He's built a team there that's really, really handy. He's developed some players. He's rebuilt a side that lost its big star when they sold out Mitrovic, and he's just quietly gone about his business. So I think probably the best manager who Moshiri looked at and thought, you know what, I like what he could. I like the idea of what he could come in and do for Everton. It might have been Marco Silva. It's just sadly there was a lot of other things going on at the club at the time Silva was here, and he just couldn't ride out the storm, sadly. So maybe if Silva had been given more time, we'd be in a much better position now. Or maybe it was just one of those deals where it was never destined to work. I don't know. But as much as everyone's going to say, oh, it's Carlo Ancelotti, I think maybe the biggest sliding doors moment for Everton might have been, had we not sacked Marco Silva, what could have been? I don't
I
know. It's
mean,
worth a thought.
I think Marco Silva might have still done fine if I think the recruitment in his final summer was just all wrong. And again, who's to blame for that? I don't know how much of that was Marco Silva's fault more. Perhaps Marcel Brand got it wrong, and again, Sheedy probably stuck his oar in too much again in that case, I think. But he certainly didn't bring in the right players. I think that Zaha panic buy that you were on about was that summer.
Iwobi was the back. We tried for Saha all window because Moshiri just was obsessed with trying to get Saha for some reason. Probably the links, because Moshiri does all his business down in London, and he was at a London club before he was at Everton. He was at Arsenal, wasn't he? And Arsenal were after Saha for years apparently. So yeah, just Moshiri got it into his head that he had to basically have Wilfred Saha playing for his team, and it was never ever happening because we couldn't afford to break the bank for him, our transfer, our wage. We couldn't break our wage structure to get him. Crystal Palace were never going to entertain selling him to another Premier League club that wasn't in the top four, and Saha himself probably wasn't that bothered about coming up to play for Everton. Really, I think he had his heart set on Arsenal or Tottenham, didn't he? And what was he lumbered with instead? Marco Silva. He got given Alex Iwobi, who was not a wide player. I still don't think is a wide player. Is again, he's someone else who just maybe was in the wrong place at the wrong time. As someone who's got ability, but was never going to be able to showcase it at Everton. But I feel sorry for Marco Silva the most of all the Everton managers who've been in the door during the Moshiri year, because I think he was the one who was let down the most by external factors more than anything.
Yeah,
Because I think he's shown that if you give him time and you give him support, and he hasn't got a load of stupid things to deal with in the background, that he actually can build a very good football team and kind of build a team spirit and a togetherness between the players and the supporters. And it's just a shame it never really got a chance to happen here. But I'd say he's the best manager, and the worst manager. Again, how do you qualify? Worst manager in terms of the manager who I just couldn't stomach, who I couldn't abide by, who I just hated seeing him on the touchline wearing the Everton crest. It's Rafa Benitez. But in terms of worst manager results wise, in terms of his percentage wins, it's probably Frank Lampard, isn't it? Frank Lampard, maybe from a coaching point of view, but I've got far more time for Frank Lampard as a person than I have Rafa Benitez. Rafa Benitez was the type of manager who came into the club where it just made me sick, thinking, I really don't want this guy here. I'll never buy into what this guy's trying to do. This guy, I know in his heart, doesn't give a jot about this club. He's here purely for himself and would dump us in a second if the other lot over the road gave him so much as a phone call. So yeah, what about you? Who's the managers who you just couldn't abide by?
yeah. After the game, Benitez was graceful. Should never have been a pointer, but also you speak of Frank Lampard's wretched record. Obviously, he inherited the mess that Benitez created. So even though I don't rate Frank Lampard as a manager, and I don't think he'll ever be a great manager, I don't think anyone could have done much walking into that situation because Benitez just poisoned the entire club, what hadn't already been poisoned by other issues.
Well, yeah, true. But to be fair, Dyche came in and made a much better fist of it than Lampard did. I mean, I'm not a Dyche lover, particularly like our kid is, but some of the stuff I've been reading over the last couple of months, people saying like, is Sean Dyche one of the worst Everton managers ever? And I'm thinking,
Not even close.
this fella is not in the same bracket as Rafa Benitez or Frank Lampard. He's not in the same bracket as Benitez in terms of how much I just dislike the fella on a personal level, but he's nowhere near as tactically inept as Lampard was. So it feels like people want to see a change of manager so much that they're just rewriting history a little bit on what
Someone was
came
saying
before
that like
Dyche.
someone said Sean Dyche is like the new Mike Walker, which is like again, I think that's just so
Oh, come on,
extreme.
behave,
Like that's
behave.
so extreme. Like I don't, I'm not a massive. I was a big fan of Sean Dyche when he was appointed, and I will say I've gone off him a little bit in the time he's managed us, but he's no Mike Walker. He's not like I think Sean
Yes,
Dyche is one of the better managers we've had under Moshiri, I think, and that's not saying
Dyche
a lot, but
Dyche, unlike a lot of other Everton managers who've come through the door, was the right guy at the right time when Everton got him. He was probably the right time on a previous occasion. We probably should have got him after we sacked Ronald Koeman and then messed about with Unsworth for a couple of months, and then eventually had to bring in Allardyce just to shore up the ship a little bit. I think if we instead of doing that, we wouldn't have had that close that season 17-18, I think it was. We wouldn't have had that close shave at relegation at the time if we just bought Dyche in then. If when we sacked Koeman, if we'd just hired Dyche then when he was still at Burnley and Burnley was still a very stable Premier League team, and given Dyche maybe a 3-year contract then I think the club would be so much better off now if we'd have had Dyche from, let's say, 2017-18, had him through the pandemic, and then when we got out the other side of the pandemic, 2021, 2022, if we'd have then, instead of like we did do, sacking Marco Silva and going to Ancelotti and then losing Ancelotti and going to Benitez, instead of this topsy-turvy ride, we'd have just had the stability of hiring Dyche 4 or 5 years earlier than we did do in the end, and then looking to replace Dyche with a manager like like a Marco Silva in maybe 2022, 2023. I think the club would have been so much better off, but it just feels like we've hired the wrong managers at the wrong times, and if they just could reverse the order a little bit, then it could have all played. There's another universe somewhere where it all just plays out far better.
yeah, I mean, I can't count the number of sliding doors moments that have gone against us. I mean, both before and after Moshiri took over, but another one we to look at is the best and worst games under Moshiri. What would you say was the best game under Moshiri?
My favourite one is the one you've already mentioned. I think it was the first game. It was the FA Cup quarter final against Chelsea when Lukaku got us 2 goals late in the second half to send us through. Because that was on my 22nd birthday. It was March 12th, 2016, and I was going out of town straight afterwards from there. And I was thinking, if Everton better win this game, because if we don't, I'm going to go into town with my mates and we're just going to be in a horrible mood because Everton didn't what we did, and the way we won it as well with Lukaku's first goal, which when he took on the entire Chelsea defence and then he slotted it in the far corner past feet versus past Quartar. It was just epic. It was one of those epic Goodison nights, wasn't it, under the lights, because it was like a 5:30 kickoff because it was on ITV. It was just
Right,
brilliant,
yeah.
and it just felt like, yeah, we've cracked it. Like Everton are going to do something. Everton might just win this cup, and even if we don't win this cup this year, we're going to be keeping our best players. We're going to be keeping Lukaku. We're going to be keeping Delafeu. We're going to be keeping John Stones. We're going to be going up and up and up and up. And in the next couple of years, we'll have won a trophy and we'd probably be back in Europe. And it just wasn't to be, was it? So my favourite game was probably that one, the very first one, before it all just went downhill after that.
Yeah, mine was early on, as you can imagine as well. It was that 4-0 against Man City the year after.
Yeah, that was a
But,
cracker, that one.
but again, I think a lot of that like early optimism went very quickly because Mashiri was such a lunatic. You immediately started getting red flags, even quite early doors. Um, yeah, what would you say the worst game was under Mashiri?
Oh, there's too many.
There's so many to get through.
There's so many. It depends again. what hurts you the most? Is it the spankings we've had in derbies? Is it the last minute defeats? Because I think the Mane derby was under Moshiri, wasn't it? Because it was under Koeman. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
very early door. Yeah, the one where I think it was Mane won it in like the 55th minute of stoppage time. It felt like past Joe Robles. That was a bad one. The Benitez Goodison derby when it was 4-1 and Brands was getting practically screamed at by the fans in the at full time. That was a bad one. How many spankings have we had? The 6-0 down at it last season, down at Stamford Bridge with Palmer, just had an absolute field day against us. That was terrible. The 2-0 against Norwich when Norwich basically couldn't buy a win. I think it was Benitez's last game before he was finally sacked. That one. There's just been so many. The game Marco Silva got sacked. I think it was a 5-2 against Liverpool's B team. Yeah, there was that. There was the Carlo derby when we got beat by Liverpool's kids, our full team. Carlo's first derby. There's just so many bad ones, isn't there? It depends whether it's a game where we got absolutely smacked and played off the park. Is it a game where it was just heartbreaking, where we didn't deserve to lose it, and then we were sucker punched right at the end. There's just so many. But if one absolutely stands out, then it might just be. Again, it was very early doors. It might just be that Roberto Martinez semi-final against Manchester United, where it felt like our name was on the cup that year. That the trophy was won by probably the worst United side in history. If it's not the worst one, then it's the second worst one, because the only one I can think that's just as bad as it is the United team that's around right now. But yeah, it had Geriatric Rooney in it. It had Anthony Martial, who was in his first season, who only seemed to score against Everton. It had who else? I'm trying to think of that Van Gaal United team. It had players who just had no business playing for United, like your Marcos Roccos and people like that, and Di Maria, and it just felt like that cup that year was there to win, and Lukaku missed about 50 million sitters and missed a penalty, and even though we equalised, we lost it with the last kick of the game. It just felt like the FA Cup was going to finally come. We were finally going to win a trophy again that year, and then it wasn't Moshiri's fault; it was the manager's fault, Martinez, for losing it. But yeah, I remember being so gutted about that, because I remember thinking, we're going to win this trophy, we're going to do it, we're going to beat this crap United team, and then we're going to go to the final, and then we're going to win on the final purely on emotion, because we're going to want it more than the other team, who ended up being Palace. But no, we ended up blowing it and just having Crystal Palace versus a crap United team in the final, in probably one of the most least memorable FA Cup finals there's ever been. Does anyone ever talk about that one? That FA Cup? No. Whereas if Everton had won it that year, it'd be getting talked about for years and years and years. But wasn't to be, was it?
On the note of Moshiri being a lunatic, what would you say was the first real red flag moment? When did Moshiri really make you think, "Hang on, he's not chilling"?
When he didn't get rid of Bill Kenwright, basically, because I still remember when Ronald Koeman got announced in a couple of months after Moshiri came in, when he sacked Martinez after he blew that semi-final. He sacked him, I think, the week before the end of the season. And then Ronald Koeman, we got him out of Southampton pretty quick. I remember, I think he was announced in the June, and at his unveiling press conference, it wasn't Moshiri sat there with Ronald Koeman for the unveiling, or one of Moshiri's appointees. It was Bill Kenwright again, front and centre, and doing his typical Shakespeare act, saying it was such a sad day when we had to say goodbye to Roberto. And I remember sitting there watching this unveiling, thinking, why is he there still? Hasn't he sold up? Hasn't he gone? And if he was going to be kept around, wasn't he only going to be one of these guys who just works the room in the lounges and tells us same old crap stories? And you might see him on a match day, but it actually comes to the day-to-day running of the club, he's not involved anymore. But he was still there front and centre at Ronald Koeman's unveiling, when Ronald Koeman was brought in as like a sign of Everton's ambition, right? No more frugal Everton, no more hand to mouth. We've just went and took a team who finished above us and has a much better starting 11 than us. We've just went and took their manager, and he's more than happy to walk out on them, considering the ambition that Everton are showing now. And then we've still got same Bill still sat there, and I remember thinking, no. Moshiri needs to make changes here. Moshiri needs to get rid of this old guard and bring in his own people. And if he's not going to do that, then there's only so much he can change. And that was exactly how it played out. He kept the old guard in place, and just competency was just nowhere to be seen. So the first big red flag was when he didn't remove the likes of Bill Kenwright and all Bill Kenwright's little cronies from the top positions at the club. He just kept them around and let them just run the club the way they always had, which is like a corner shop.
I think a corner shop's a bit generous. It's corner shops don't get run into the ground that badly, I don't think. But yeah, for me, it was that moment when I think it was the transfer window the following year. I think when I really started to think, hang on a minute, he's not the full shill. And I think it was the you could see out the window went on. We were just signing loads of like number 10s. You weren't signing players in the right positions, and then
I think this was the same summer that he rang up Jim White and said, "Oh, the reason we didn't sell James McCarthy is because I feel a special affinity for him because he was on the front of the programme for my first game or something like that."
Yeah, because
said something stupid. Yeah,
he didn't get moved to Sissoko from Spurs. And
yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
because he wouldn't sign for us, he said, "Well, we can't sell James McCarthy, so we don't want to sign a new player because they don't want to sell James McCarthy because he was on the programme or something."
yeah.
He was one of our
Basically,
own.
it was when he was obviously all these stupid phone calls to Jim White. Hello, Jim, or when he's he gave a couple of other silly interviews as well. I don't think it was just to TalkSport. Did he give one to Sky around that time? To might have been Alan Irwin. I don't remember, but every time he spoke publicly, he just made himself sound like an absolute buffoon. And they say the best owners are the owners who are seen and not heard. And that's a reason why I think a lot of owners are smart enough just not to open their mouths. Mike Ashley, for all this criticism he got, and rightly so from Newcastle fans, because he was absolutely awful. He was their version of Moshiri, if not worse, because he never put any money in, but he was smart enough to just never open his mouth, really. He just was silent constantly. And it's the same with that fella who owns Arsenal, Silent Stan. So a lot of owners, especially when things are not going particularly well, they just know, don't open your mouth because there's nothing you can say that's going to make it better. You're just going to make things worse. And it just felt like no matter how bad things got, Moshiri just wouldn't apply any common sense. He just would always open his mouth and ends up embarrassing the club even more so than it was already doing on the pitch.
Yeah, it's some mad ones. You think of all the mad moments we've been through with Moshiri. I think that just that AGM in 2018 is enough to like that you could write a book on that alone. I think
Is that the one where he said we don't want to be a museum?
No, that was the one in 2017 when we announced the new stadium. Everything was looking quite rosy at that point. It was the year after when I think we just pinned Koeman. Allardyce was the manager at this stage. We were playing some wretched football and there was a bit more unrest at this stage. And he was starting to say, but then he tried to allay everyone's fears. Like Steve Walsh come out and said that it doesn't matter that we sold Lukaku because we would have finished seventh either way, whether Lukaku was there or not. And then Denise Barrett Baxendale come out and said City's all ours because we basically opened an office in the Liver building.
Yeah, I'm planning for the Champions League.
There's your Moshiri.
Corker from Denise, yeah.
There's your ultimate Moshiri moment when he said
the Fab Four.
No, all the Fab Four was in that one as well. He said like Toten and Balassi or whatever.
Toten, Balassi. Yeah.
But then it was that one when like he said like when he called Lukaku's mum a witch doctor or something like.
He got in trouble for that. Seriously,
yeah.
I think he. I don't know if it actually went to court or anything, but I know Lukaku was talking about suing him for that, for libel, because it could be construed. It could be construed as, I don't think Moshiri meant it like this, because I think Moshiri is just a complete buffoon and an idiot and doesn't. But that could be construed, and Lukaku definitely construed it as a racial dig. That, talking about voodoo and witch doctors and all that. I mean, you don't know, do you? But I know he was very lucky that sort of came and went, that remark, because I remember Lukaku wasn't one bit happy about it, and he was talking about how he might have to prosecute for that, and he probably would have had legs to stand on had he took that to court for a hate crime.
Well, Yeah, I think I remember like I was living with my mate at the time, and me and him were just treating at the amount of things coming out of this AGM. And then the following day, Ross Barkley left, and Joe Anderson said he was going to call the police on him for running his contract
Yeah,
down.
it was
Like
another
just
ridiculous thing, wasn't it?
like everything was just. I remember that was like when I realized like the whole like. I mean, it was already going to pop by like earlier on in the season. We were struggling and stuff, and Allardyce had come in, but that AGM was just proof that like this the,
this
the,
isn't a
cast,
bump in the road.
the castle made a sign and
They
it's
can't do
falling
any. Yeah,
apart.
this ownership model can't do any better than what it's doing. Yeah,
Yeah, honestly, I mean,
Jesus, but I've
it was
just
like
said
the
it's.
foundations were crumbling. I remember
Somebody's wrote a book. Forgive me, I can't remember the author's name, but I've seen it on Twitter being advertised. The Moshiri years, and oh my god, I mean, I'm not going to read it anytime soon because it's still too raw. But you know, if Everton, like if in 15, 20 years, and Everton are in a much better state, and we're all happy with what the club's doing, I might buy something like that and read it back and just crease myself laughing at it, thinking, you know what? Do you know the way some people are like, I really love reading about like World War Two now that it's like decades and decades past now. They can actually look back and read it objectively, and they don't. It doesn't scare them so much that how close the world came to like ending practically in nuclear war. That's how I feel about reading about the Moshiri era. It's not distant enough yet. I have to give it a couple of years and I might read it. And there's probably so many stories that haven't seen the light of day about Moshiri. Like the maddest shit he's ever done has probably never even come out publicly. We've got to wait until maybe some NDAs clear, or maybe Moshiri's well out of football, and before some people feel safe enough to come out and actually tell the truth because they're worried they might get in trouble. But yeah, I can promise you there's so much stuff about Farhad Moshiri that we don't know that it would probably make it our toenails curl.
and that's the thing. In spite of him being such a lunatic, he still continued to appear to be committed to the Everton cause, be it for our
Uh,
benefit. I mean, be it for our benefit or detriment. I think the tide turned in terms of commitment. It was obviously when I think when the Ukraine war started, and obviously his bankroll.
the tap was turned off. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was never. He was always a front guy for Usmanov. It's not even a secret now, is it? I mean, they're never going to say it on the record, but it doesn't take a blind man to know that it was Usmanov who was basically making all the big decisions and pulling the strings, and Moshiri was just the face of it for him because whatever reason, Usmanov didn't want to be front and centre. Now, whether that's because he was worried about ever getting sanctioned or anything, or having to answer any uncomfortable questions about his links to Putin, which this all basically became an issue later on. It's probably something to do with that. But yeah, Usmanov was I think like 30% shareholder in Arsenal for quite a lot of years in the 2000s and the early part of the 2010s, and wanted to basically become the majority shareholder, or at least take control of the football operations at Arsenal, like the way that this Sir Jim Ratcliffe guy is doing at United now. Usmanov basically wanted to be in the driver's seat at Arsenal, and at quite a few times, took his case to the Arsenal supporters to try and get them to back him, saying, "Oh well, if I was allowed to have my way, if I was allowed to put money in, we'd be still winning league titles, we'd be getting the best players, we wouldn't be just looking to finish fourth every year." But fortunately, the Arsenal hierarchy, the board that was in place there, was smart enough to never let him get his hands on the family silver and to keep him shut out. And I think in the end, he realised it was never going to happen for him at Arsenal, so they decided to up sticks and go elsewhere. And what other Premier League club was on the market and desperate to have a rich investor come in and throw all his money at it? Everton. And, Bill Kenwright was probably, I know you can never prove this, but Bill Kenwright was probably promised he could stay around and he could keep his jobs for mates for whoever he wanted to keep them for. And they came into the club, Moshiri and Usmanov, and were given free rein to do whatever they wanted, other than maybe just, bin off a couple of people who Bill wanted them to keep around. And look what happens when you get a chaotic owner, you're going to get a chaotic business. And when you've got a chaotic business, you're going to have chaotic results. And that's exactly how it's all transpired over the last 8-9 years, however long he was here running things. So yeah, Usmanov was the real power behind the throne. And as soon as he had his resources taken away from him when he got sanctioned and he wasn't able to invest any money into a UK business anymore, then basically Everton were up Pooh's Creek without a paddle because there was no money for us to put into the club. And Usmanov just at that point became probably desperate to hoard all his wealth as much as he can and just sail off into the sunset with it, because that Ukraine war is still going on now, and all these friends of Putin, these Russian oligarchs, are all still sanctioned, and there's no sign that those sanctions are ever going to get lifted, and there's no sign that the war's going to stop. So they're basically just happy to, you know, go hoard all their wealth that they can and just sail off on their yacht somewhere and just wait it out. But for your business like Everton, a football club, you can't just wait it out and wait for things to right the ship to right itself. You've got to keep going day to day, and we weren't able to do that. The only way we kept the lights on was by making a few big sales like Richarlison and like Anthony Gordon. If we hadn't made those sales, the club probably wouldn't exist in its current form. So yeah, it's just so much went on, and as I said, maybe we'll get the full story one day. But even if the full story comes out, would you want to read it? Because I'd be covering my eyes. It's just that horrific.
It's going to make you want to vomit, isn't it? But
yeah,
and then obviously then they had protracted the last sort of 2.5 years of protracted speculation, failed takeovers. There's been about 3 or 4 different parties potentially buying us in the last 2.5 years before the takeover was done. I think there was the Kaminsky Group first, and then obviously the more notable ones were MSP, who were somehow, I think this was even more sickening for me, were vetoed by that right to media funding who Ken Wright used to be very pally with.
Yeah.
And then, which was a disaster in itself. And then obviously then we turned to 777, which was, I think you described it pretty accurately before. It was a Ponzi scheme.
Well, yeah, it's. I don't think as a group they're still trading anymore. I think that if they're not insolvent, then they're basically only being propped up by a very bare skeletal structure. I know all the big players who were involved in this, in the attempt to take over Everton, like your Josh Wanders and all that. They've left the scene now. I don't know where he is, whether he's hiding out somewhere with his ill-gotten gains, or whether he's still, doing business very, very low key somewhere in the United States. I don't know, but he was basically removed from his position, whatever it was, CEO, chairman of 777, and they're basically in court now, getting sued in New York for basically every dime that they're worth, and all of their assets are being taken off them. I don't know what assets they used to have that they still do. I know they don't have the likes of Genoa anymore. Genoa's been took off them. I think the club in Brazil, Vasco da Gama, has been took off them. I think they don't have any more shares in Sevilla. I think they've been took off them. And it was the club in Belgium. Stanley Liège, yeah. I think Stanley Liège, the shares they had in Stanley Liège transferred back to the previous owner, which was something that could legally happen under Belgian law if they couldn't pay the bills. So 777, of all the stupid things Farhad Moshiri did, not even just stupid, just downright irresponsible and reckless and wrong that he did, getting us even taking a second meeting with 777 was by far the worst one. 777 were the type of people where you don't even have to have a lick of business sense. You'd walk out of a meeting with them after 10 minutes because they didn't have any resources to back up what they were saying. It was clear as day that it was not all above board with them, and he persevered with it for over a year because he was thinking purely about himself and not the club. So I don't give him any credit for being committed to the Everton cause. He tried desperately to palm us off on these criminals, and if that would have succeeded, if the Premier League had waved that takeover through, Everton wouldn't exist currently.
Oh, well, exactly. And, for all the issues, that's the one thing we'll say is the Premier League did drag the heels on that. And I've got a lot to say about the Premier League, what with deductions and whatnot. But fair play to them for dragging the heels on that, because at least we know that, these vetting processes actually do work. Because
they came out and said, didn't they? Essentially, the Premier League, Richard Masters, he says we can't tell an owner who he can and can't sell a business to. All we can do is just give the final regulatory approval that this group can come in and basically operate as owners of this football club if they're going to be in this league. Sort of thing. They can't turn around and say to Moshiri, no, you can't take their money, you can't sell your business to them. All we can turn around and say is, if you want to sell to them, then we're not going to allow Everton to be in the Premier League. And if Everton weren't allowed to be in the Premier League, there was no reason for 777 or any other group to want us at that point, because they wanted us for the brand. So it took months and months and months of 777 not being able to hold up their end of the bargain before finally Moshiri just had to pull the plug on it. He didn't pull the plug because he couldn't. The Premier League said no or wouldn't say yes. He just pulled the plug because they ran out of being able to loan other people's money, because they were propping us up with money that was not theirs. They were robbing Peter to pay Paul. They were getting all their money that they were loaning to the club every month from an insurance firm in the US, which is now taking them to court and has them over a barrel. So that's why they're just basically the non-existent as a group anymore, because somebody's been left carrying the can. And I don't know if it's going to be Josh Bonder or someone else who's involved at 777, but basically someone is owed a lot of money and they're going to court trying to get it back, and who knows if they're going to have any success. But just thank goodness Everton were not dragged into it, because they weren't able to get the keys.
Yeah, it was that alone just reminded me like why we'll be discussing it briefly at the end, but like his legacy is very negative. It's got to be, after like we've literally just discussed like what could well have become a reality for us there. On the more positive note, obviously we're edging ever closer to the new stadium, and some fans have done a bit of revisionism since the takeover's been completed, and says he does deserve some credit for delivering the stadium, the Everton Stadium. But how, to what extent do we have to just say, yeah, fair play, he's delivered a brilliant stadium?
He achieved more. The way I look at it with Farhad Moshiri, he achieved more than the owner who was in place before him, which was Bill Kenwright, because Bill Kenwright achieved absolutely nothing. 3 failed stadium moves, one of them which was proven to be illegal and was stopped by a government inquiry, one that was never really on the cards anyway, the Walton Hall project that was talked about for a couple of years, and the very first one, with the one that was most likely to happen and absolutely should have happened, the King's Dock, that was the one that Kenwright just failed miserably and couldn't come up with the money that was needed, even though it was basically a pittance on, if you buy today's inflation. So he achieved more than Bill Kenwright did as an owner, but that's not saying much, because Bill Kenwright achieved absolutely nothing, and to me set Everton back years. And Moshiri has set Everton back years as well in terms of on the pitch with his decisions. All we can do now is hope that the stadium becoming open will undo a lot of that damage and help Everton try and catch up, because we've got an awful lot of ground to make up, because we've been losing ground on the top teams for 30 years more. And it's just been accelerated over the last 5-6 years with the woeful decision making.
Yeah, so I think if anything, it's a case of uh, you can right, perhaps some of the wrongs can be put right, but it doesn't take anything away from the damage that has been done.
So, some damage is irreparable and some damage is fixable, and we only have to hope that the damage that's been done by Farhad Moshiri is fixable, despite his best efforts to try and make it irreparable by palming us off the 777 and lumbering us with players who on that could go on. All these players who were basically rinsing the club because they were on massive contracts that we could never afford and should never have handed out in the first place. So, despite his best efforts to just drive Everton into the floor, Farhad Moshiri, he hasn't managed to do it. And hopefully, now that he's gone, the actual road to recovery can properly start now. And if we can get on the road to recovery, we'll hopefully in our lifetimes we can get there to the other end and actually see Everton Football Club as a team that, and as a basically an institution that not even wins things. That would be nice, but just a club that doesn't just exist for other institutions to laugh at anymore. I'm sick of being the club that everyone laughs at, which is what we became under Farhad Moshiri, the banter club, the club that can't even make a good decision by accident. That's all we became under Farhad Moshiri, just a banter football team. And if we can stop being that now and being a club that everyone else takes seriously again, then that's good enough for me. And everything else past that's a bonus.
And on that note, just briefly on the Freakin Group takeover, what's your take on them taking us over. How do you feel about the future with them in charge?
They're starting from a very, very low base. And, well, Farhad Moshiri started from a low base with Bill Kenwright. And did he even manage to clear that? Some would argue no, he didn't. The Freakins, if they can just not send us into near bankruptcy and they sell us off to a Ponzi scheme in America, then they're doing all right, aren't they? But you just have to hope that they've learned from mistakes they've made in their other ventures with the likes of Roma, and that they're the type of owners who will listen and won't make the same mistake more than once, and are the type of owners who know they've got to learn to walk before they can crawl. So, sorry, they've got to learn to crawl before they can walk, and they're not going to try and run before they can walk. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm not going to let myself get too um, excited again because we've been stung before, haven't we, by thinking that this new owner is going to make everything better. We've been down that road, and the new owner only made things even worse. So let's just hope that they're competent people and that they can run Everton the way it should be run, which is just with its best foot forward and not taking the fans for basically shills and jokes and accusing us of things that we haven't done.
I think just a bit of professionalism wouldn't go amiss. And I think that's the one thing that they do seem to portray themselves as more professional than anything that we've had before, which, whether it delivers the goods or not, it's a bit of a breath of fresh air to see people who aren't complete and utter maniacs and, narcissists, um, of which one of our previous owners was one and one was the other. So hopefully, it might be a bit better, but like you said, I'm proceeding with a lot of caution because I got quite giddy, same as you, over Machidi 8, 9 years ago, and here we are having this discussion. So that tells you all you need to know about Machidi's either, and where, like you say, where we've got to bounce back from. But we'll finish up with this anyway. What would you say is Farhad Moshiri's legacy at Everton?
Can't sum it up into one word, mate. Just too much has
I
happened.
can.
Just what?
Failure?
I think that's being too nice. It's more than failure, mate. Failure would be if we'd have got close to a few things and then fell short. Chaos, chaos, lies, building on fire, whatever you want to say. Its legacy for me is just chaos to me, and not the good type of chaos. The type of chaos where you're desperate for it to stop. And thankfully now it has stopped, and hopefully we never have to experience it again.
Yeah. So we did have we had a little bit of a when the takeover was completed on our Toffee Blues X account. We did put out a little poll for people to give like the best games, worst games, and basically what Paul and I have done in this video. And we've had a lot of similar answers we're given. One we never even mentioned. One of the big questions was what was the craziest Machidi moment. We never even got on to mentioning Headlock Gate.
I, I, I don't even blame that on Moshiri, to be honest with you.
That was the other one, I think, who done that.
I very much doubt Moshiri. If you were in a room with Moshiri and you asked him about that, I'd very much doubt that he even knows what you're talking about. Because he wasn't there at the ground that day. He hasn't been at the ground since. That was on. I think that was very much the design of someone else.
Yeah, and then the final one, I think, is we need a striker and we'll get one. Which is that
was the interview he did with Jazz, wasn't it?
the
Yeah,
mad Jazz interview was like
that was
was
before.
photoshopped onto the video or something.
No, Jazz actually was in the room with him because Jazz produced the receipts. I've seen a photograph of from that day where Jazz and Moshiri like together in the same photograph. So no, it was definitely a real interview, but it was clearly an interview that was done weeks prior to its release, and this was before like the likes of Danjuma had decided that he didn't want to come, and there were other players who we were after who their agents probably told them, no, that club's a basket case. You're best going somewhere else at the minute, the likes of your Angalas. You're just getting turned down by people left, right, and centre, and that was clearly recorded before we were running into all this difficulty. So yeah, it was just again a bad look and made the club just look embarrassing and stupid and incompetent. And I'm just that's all he's managed to do. And all the time he's been here, make the club look like a laughing stock. And I'm glad that he can't do that anymore because he's gone.
Yeah, I mean that's the one thing I will hope for is from the new owners is that the club could maybe command a bit more respect again because it's just its whole reputation in the gutter at the moment. The club, if we can repair that, then that goes a long way to maybe giving us a chance of competing again. But the club needs to re basically reinvent itself now as one that can be taken seriously in the modern era.
Well, hopefully so. Hopefully so. We've made the first step in the right direction, I mean, which is actually getting him out the club, and we'll just see what happens from here. Hopefully, things can take care of themselves.
We'll leave it at that anyway, guys. Let us know your opinions on the Moshiri era and the Freakins takeover as well. Get your comments coming in. Give this video a like and subscribe for more content. Until next time, guys. Thanks for tuning in on the Toffee Blues.